Hello and welcome into this edition of the Golf Show podcast with Rex and Lav. Well, the European Ryder Cup team has been finalized, and it includes 11 of the 12 players who romped to victory 2 years ago in Rome. And in fact, Rex, they kept all the same surnames from Rome. They simply swapped out a Hogard, Nikolai for Rasmus, who earned previously one of those 6 automatic qualifying spots. You okay with what Luke Donald did here with the 6 captain's picks?
You could almost say 11 and a half out of the 12 who played in Rome, can't you? I mean, Rasmus, Nikolai, I don't want to...
Identical twins.
Dig in. Identical twins, very much alike. Games are very similar. I will say, if this was a football team, Luke Donald wouldn't even have to change the jerseys. The name on the back would remain the same. So it's not going to be that big of a deal. Yeah, absolutely. You look at what, and this is we're going to have this conversation over the next few weeks. The idea that we know what the European team is. That's why we're going to spend more time picking apart the U.S. team, because there's so many questions when it comes to not just the team, but the captain. We know Luke Donald is a really good captain based on what he did in Rome. He was brilliant. By all accounts, he pulled every lever he needed to. He knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He knew exactly what rock to look under for all of the different secrets. And now you've got essentially 11 of the 12 that were there. And 11 of the 12 are playing pretty good golf. I know there's a couple holes. I know Sepp Straka hasn't been playing his best golf the last few weeks. But by and large, you have to like the European team for all of those reasons.
And for the record, it is Luke Donald going 7 through 11 on the point standings. That's Shane Lowry, Sepp Straka, Ludwig Oberg, Victor Hovland, Matt Fitzpatrick, and going all the way down to number 24 for what was probably the no-brainer choice for Luke Donald in the two-time major champion in Jon Rahm. Technically, historically speaking, this is the largest amount of rollover, Rex, from one team to the next in Ryder Cup history, just a single player being swapped out. The fact that there's just one rookie on the squad for the Europeans is notable as well. That hasn't happened since 2012, the miracle at Medina. The other 3 times that has happened historically with just one rookie on the team, that team has either won the cup or retained the cup. And so I think there's something to be said for some sort of continuity, some sort of consistency. Did you think with what Luke Donald could have done, there were other avenues for him? Or was this like such a no-brainer choice, certainly compared to Keegan Bradley, whose selections were sort of rife with speculation and conjecture over the past couple of months?
No, I think as much sleep as Keegan Bradley probably lost over the last few weeks. I think Luke Donald probably slept like a baby simply because there weren't many decisions to be made. I don't know. You pointed out the jump that he had to make to Jon Rahm. I think most people will agree it's not really a jump based on what Jon Rahm means to that team. I think the rookie angle is fascinating because we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and it's going to be an element at Bethpage for both sides, just not the European side, but the U.S. side. And if you're Luke Donald, you probably weren't looking very hard at rookies, to be honest with you. I think Harry Hall was like a talking point at the Tour Championship because he's such a good putter and because he played so well this year in the United States, because he made it all the way to East Lake. He'd had a phenomenal year. I don't think Luke Donald ever really seriously considered picking him, to be honest with you. By all accounts, he had a dinner or two with him and they had conversations. But I don't know if you want to march into Bethpage if you're Luke Donald with a whole bunch of rookies. And you can make the argument, I think, statistically, that the rookies don't necessarily perform that much worse than the veterans do. But in this particular arena, I don't think you want anyone in that environment that hasn't been there before, that's going to get rattled, that's going to get overwhelmed. I mean, we've taken a look at what that first tee is going to look like. It's essentially going to be a huge amphitheater that's going to include the first tee and the 18th green. And it's just going to be thousands of people, most of them screaming, most of them drunk, and most of them against you. Yeah, you don't want to be a first timer in that situation.
And I think that's a great point. It's also worth pointing out, Rex, like Rasmus Hogard, technically he is a rookie. He is a first-time Ryder Cup participant. However, the European Ryder Cup brass, Luke Donald and his vice captains, brought Rasmus Hogard into sort of the wider non-playing staff in Rome 2 years ago. Nikolai, his twin brother, was on the team. Rasmus was brought in a non-playing capacity. So he saw the cadence of Ryder Cup week. He saw the drama. He saw how it works. He saw sort of the behind the scenes, machinations from the European Ryder Cup brass. He saw how players sort of get ready for their sessions and what they're going to be asked to do. He was very much involved in that process. So it's not going to be, yes, it's going to be eye-opening standing on the first tee at Bethpage with 40,000 fans screaming against you And that potentially is rattling. But how it actually works during Ryder Cup week, that's not going to be foreign towards Rasmus Højgaard. I think that's important for him as well. I see your point about Harry Hall. You know, the stats love him. He's one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. He was Mr. Consistency. It seemed like every week he had a top 15, top 20 finish. I think the only thing about Harry Hall that hurt him was that save for the BMW Championship, the second playoff event in the FedEx Cup playoffs. He really didn't sniff contention, serious contention, you know, really being there at the business end on Sunday compared to some of these other players. And sure, Luke Donald could have gone other directions. Matt Wallace, who is fighting for PGA Tour status after 2025, he certainly played inspired golf these past couple of weeks on the DP World Tour. You saw the emotions after coming up short at the European Masters on Sunday. It's not really known if Matt Wallace won that golf tournament, if all of a sudden he was going to be an 11th hour pick for Luke Donald. He certainly seemed like it's like that could have been the case. Nikolai Højgaard, you actually could have made the case that he had a better PGA Tour season than Rasmus, who was on the team. However, Rasmus, based largely on what he did on the DP World Tour, won the Irish Open, went all the way at the DP World Tour Championship late last year. He accrued most of his points, Ryder Cup wise, in late 2024. That's why he was sort of hovering in that top 6 spot that he eventually secured a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, your boy Marco Penge has been brilliant this summer after the gambling ban earlier this year. One player, Rex, that I couldn't help but chuckle with was Sergio Garcia, who I think if the Ryder Cup was in mid-April, sure. Like, I think Sergio Garcia could have been a wild card selection for that team. He was playing some pretty good golf on LIV. He won a tournament on the Asian Tour. Like, he looked pretty good for a 45-year-old. However, he has not done much of anything over the past 5 months. And this week, he withdrew from the Irish Open, telling reporters that he was so disappointed by the call that he received from Luke Donald and that he was looking forward to being a part of that team. And once he was called and told that he was not going to be a part of Luke Donald's team, he thought that it was unfair to himself and everyone else for him to be so distracted inside the ropes that he was doing the right thing and withdrawing from the tournament and spending more time with his friends and his family. This is like an all-time case of being delusional. Here's a player who is currently outside the top 100 in the data golf rankings, who is losing to the likes of Richard Bland week in and week out on LIV Golf, who somehow thought that he was going to be a part of this Ryder Cup team.
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. You stole my word. Delusional was what I was going to go with. As a player, now I can make an argument as a vice captain that if we want to start mending bridges, if we want to start looking ahead, if we want to start figuring out how to bring the two sides together, and let's face it, the Europeans have done a better job of that than we have here in the United States, then maybe he should have been in the team room. Maybe he should have been part of that conversation. I think certainly he could have brought something to the team in that capacity. But no, you're right. He's not even played well on LIV Golf. We make this argument all the time that what does it really mean that Joaquin Niemann had this historic season on LIV Golf? What does it really mean that Jon Rahm was so consistent? I'll argue that those two still prove it on the international level. They still prove it when they get the opportunity, when they get to go play in majors and DP World Tour events. I don't think Sergio Garcia has proven it anywhere. Absolutely not as a player.
And like Luke Donald most likely called Sergio Garcia out of respect, out of deference.
I don't even know why he got a phone call. I don't know what the protocol is on that. I got to call everybody down to 78th on the list. Is that the way it works?
I think it's probably as a courtesy as his former Ryder Cup teammate, as a player who had made it obvious. He paid his fines to the DP World Tour, wanting desperately to be on that team. But Sergio Garcia, just a couple months ago, remember at the PGA Championship, acknowledged that he needed to play better if he really warranted serious consideration for that team. He has not done so. I'm not sure why he has changed his tune that way. I actually think he has a lot of relationship mending and building to do before he's I think a lot of people expect him to be the Ryder Cup captain in 2031 when the Ryder Cup heads to Spain that year. 6 years is a long time. That's an eternity in professional golf. A lot of people would think that Sergio Garcia should be a lock to be the captain it certainly seems like he needs to do some relationship mending. I also want to point out, Rex, just like we talked with the American Ryder Cup team, there is a difference between forming a team that the captain wants and picking guys who are quote unquote deserving, right? Like if it was deserving, you wouldn't have any captain's picks at all. You would just go strictly by the point standings. Those are the guys who earn the points. This is about Luke Donald and the 6 guys who he wants in those spots, in those pairings, and to your earlier point, in that environment. There are Ryder Cups, there are away Ryder Cups, and there are away Ryder Cups at Bethpage Black. And Rory McIlroy, who talked to reporters on Wednesday ahead of the Irish Open, made that point abundantly clear. These are the 12 guys that Luke Donald wanted to be in that atmosphere, in that environment. In Rory's opinion, winning an away Ryder Cup is one of the most difficult things to do in all of golf, perhaps in all of sports at the moment. Europe has a great chance, a great opportunity to do so, and Luke Donald feels very good about the 12 guys that he's bringing, even if it's not technically quote unquote fair based on the point standings or who he's grabbing.
I don't think fair factors into the equation, to be quite honest with you. What I'll point at is the sort of the arc of the captaincy. If you look at how captains have become more empowered, and I'll go back to Paul Azinger in 2008. And I spoke with Paul Azinger at the Tour Championship just 2 weeks ago about this. He was there getting the Payne Stewart Award, and clearly Keegan Bradley's dilemma came up, and Paul had a lot of thoughts to go into it. Paul was the type of captain, he wanted 12 picks. He didn't necessarily think that I should have 10, I should have 2 picks, I should have 4, I should have 6. As a captain, you should want to build the best possible team you can based on a lot of different factors. Certainly Bethpage and what that environment is going to be like is going to be one of those factors. The other part is, what's the golf course going to play like? You and I talked about this when Keegan Bradley made his picks a few weekends, a few Mondays ago, with the idea of there are certain statistics that players need to have going into Bethpage Black. We don't know exactly how it's going to set up, but we know what it is. It's a big, mean ballpark. You've got to hit it a long way. You've got to hit fairways. You got to be really good 200 plus yards out with your iron play. That's kind of what you need to do. And then, of course, you need to putt well to be able to compete in match play. Those 2 things factor in. I think pairings factor in, the idea of personalities going together. However, I will say it kind of changes from captain to captain. Paul probably wanted 12 picks. Davis Love didn't want any. He just wanted to take 1 through 12 off the list. I think it just is based on who you are as a kind of a personality. I don't think fairness ever factored in when it came to this, at least with Luke Donald. I think Keegan Bradley may have wrestled with it a little bit himself, only because he should have been a pick. I mean, we talked a lot about this the last 2 weeks, and he realized that it's probably best for the team if I'm not. But I don't know that anyone, Sergio Garcia or anyone, can make a good argument that, no, it's not fair that I wasn't picked.
I think when you look at these 6 guys like Jon Rahm, Ludwig Oberg, complete no-brainers. Matt Fitzpatrick really came on strong, made that switch to Mark Blackburn as a swing coach after the Masters, played some good golf this summer. Shane Lowry, Victor Hovland, though more inconsistent this season than they've been in the past. These guys are veterans who have certainly shown enough to warrant a pick. Sepp Straka, to me, is the biggest question mark for European captain Luke Donald at this point. He withdrew, Sepp Straka did, from the BMW Championship to attend to a personal matter, finished last at Eastlake. He's the only player on that European Ryder Cup team who is not among the early commits to next week's BMW PGA Championship, the final tune-up for the European Ryder Cup team. Clearly, he must have given assurances to Luke Donald that he will be good to go for Bethpage and the Ryder Cup. But I do think it's notable to point that out as well. I think the pairings point that you made, Rex, is also is well taken. You look at what Luke Donald was able to do in Rome, putting Jon Rahm and Tyrrell Hatton together, putting Ludwig Oberg and Victor Hovland together, Sepp Straka, Shane Lowry, Rory McIlroy, Tommy Fleetwood, Bob McIntyre, Justin Rose, Rory and Fitz. Like these are well-established teams that he already has, who were very successful. Just knowing that and being able to trust that, I think is a really powerful tool. And I think that's why a lot of people think that although they have been blowouts these last 5 Ryder Cups, favoring the home team, this does feel like the best chance for an away team to potentially stage an upset.
And there was a bit of a quirk situation at the Tour Championship. Shane Lowry wasn't aware that he wasn't going to get European Ryder Cup points at East Lake. He arrived thinking that I'm guaranteed to make the cut. I'm guaranteed to finish inside the top 30. He was clinging on to that last automatic qualifying spot. Turns out they did not get points that week. And so he actually lost that automatic qualifying spot to Rasmus. So there was a bit of a leapfrog situation just based on a little bit of weird math when it comes to the European side. And I will say that beyond the stats and beyond the experience that we've talked about, as we've also talked about, Bethpage is going to be a different animal. And the conversation at the Tour Championship was about which European is going to struggle the most with the crowds. We're assuming, and I think it's a safe assumption, that the crowds are going to be brutal. It's going to be a New York crowd. They're going to be overserved by the time the afternoon matches get on the golf course. And there's going to be things that are said that most of golfers haven't heard. And I think most golfers are prepared for that. I think all 24 players on both teams know what's coming. That doesn't mean the likes of Jon Rahm or Hatton or even maybe Rory to a certain degree are going to be able to deal with what comes their way, because I think it is going to be brutal and it will very well go both ways. I've seen the Yankees crowds boo the Yankees when they get off to a bad start and say nasty things to their home team when they get off to a bad start in games. I can imagine a similar scenario if the U.S. doesn't get off to a good start on Friday. So that's an element that Luke Donald really couldn't even factor in, but it's going to be real.
Rory talked on Wednesday, Rex, about sort of Novak Djokovic. And I'm not a huge tennis fan, but apparently on Tuesday night at the U.S. Open in New York, he played American Taylor Fritz, who was obviously the crowd was very pro-American, trying to root him to the upset victory. Obviously, Djokovic won in 4 sets, but Novak actually talked to the European Ryder Cup team in 2023, sort of about playing under that sort of spotlight, playing potentially when there's some sort of disadvantage to you. And, that wasn't necessarily the case in Rome because it was a home Ryder Cup, but just sort of channeling the negative energy that you might be feeling into something that's very, very positive. You look at Novak's career, he's done that basically his entire career. He's never been this beloved figure. He was always the foil to either a Roger Federer or a Rafa Nadal, 2 players who are immensely popular and also immensely successful. I think certainly Rory is thinking that way, but having to channel that sort of negative energy into something positive and not letting it spiral out of control. Like I think you can make the argument that Rory had spiraling out of control in the parking lot with others, including Bones Mackay. So I think that's going to be very interesting. I absolutely cannot wait to get up there in just a couple of weeks' time. More Ryder Cup talk on the way. Rex, one thing that just popped into our inbox on Wednesday morning is the new Golf Channel Games. This is airing on Wednesday night, December 17th. It's going to be under the lights at Trump National Jupiter. Interesting format. Scottie Scheffler versus Rory McIlroy. They're each going to have 4-man teams competing in 4 different stages over the course of a couple of hours. Again, under the lights at Trump National Jupiter. There's going to be a time drive, chip, and putt competition. There's going to be a 14 club challenge where 2 players are squaring off and picking from the same bag from a set distance, like 150 yards. There's a time shootout with an alternate shot format among the team over 3 holes. And there's also a to-be-determined captain's challenge between Rory and Scottie hitting a variety of shots. I think the point here, Rex, in what I'm seeing with the new Golf Channel Games, again, December 17th, is that it's all timed. It's all under the gun. There's high stress. There's high energy. It's not going to feel like those static team matches that we've been subjected to over the years with the match. I think this is a really cool idea.
I think if you look back, let's say the last 2 years in sports business, and my argument would be 2 of the most successful sports business stories have been what the NHL did essentially with their All-Star game. They created a tournament called the Four Nations, and it proved to be wildly successful just because you were able to bring this nationalistic pride into it, and there were a lot of elements, and it made it something much more important than the All-Star game ever was. People wanted to pay attention. Also, the NBA started their in-season tournament, which is essentially the same games that they always play. They just created something else. I only point these 2 things out because if you're a sports executive, what you're trying to do is maximize the potential of your product. And I would argue that both of these things maximize the potential of the NBA and the NHL. I know this is a little different because we're taking sort of the game of golf, and we're turning it into something more in bite-sized elements, which is what I think you have to do in this day and age, where people are only going to look at TikTok for so long. They're only going to look at Reels for so long, and that's how they're going to digest their golf coverage. I love the idea, though, that you're creating something out of thin air that I think people are going to like. And it's not going to be easy because it's in the middle of a time. You're coming up on Christmas. You're in the middle of bowl season. The NFL season is in full bloom. I mean, you've overdone everything. You've ate too much. You've drank too much. You've watched too much TV. You probably feel bloated. You don't feel good about yourself. But this is going to give golf fans an opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise. An opportunity that, yes, you and I are going to watch it because we're golf nerds. But you're going to take these elements, and we'll go straight to the drive, chip, and putt. And you and I both have watched what that means to junior golf, what that means to the growth of golf, what Augusta National has done with the drive, chip, and putt competition. I've seen it in my own household, where when my youngest son was of a certain age and realized this was going on, it was, oh, why can't I do that? And so I think adding the shot clock to it adds an element. And I will argue that having the best players in the world do it is also going to be entertaining. And the shot clock itself, I think, is fascinating. And everyone's going to probably look at TGL. I would go back to the Shot Clock Masters. That predates TGL. That started in 2018 on the DP World Tour. I love the concept. I think everybody liked the idea of the shot clock looming over someone's shoulder as they tried to figure out which shots to hit. So all of these elements, I think, are fascinating to me for a lot of different reasons. One, you're creating content, golf content, during a time of year when you normally don't have it. But it's also compelling. If you drop this in June, I think it would be just as interesting.
Yeah, and like people are going to point to the shot clock in TGL, which I don't think it serves much of a purpose other than to just show that these guys can play shots in 40 seconds. It doesn't have to be like what we see week in and week out on the PGA Tour, where guys are taking 90 seconds in order to pick it. This is going to be more stressful, sort of more energy, a race against the clock, which I think is a certain compelling component to the competition. I will say, Rex, fervent listeners of the pod will remember at the beginning of the year and also in 2024, I've been calling for something like this. So I'm actually really excited. Like, I thought it made a lot of sense to do something like this. I would say in like the run up to Kapalua. And I've always thought over the years that the PGA Tour hasn't done a great job of promoting the season opening event as like this big bonanza. Like, hey, we're back. And I thought like like a Pro Bowl-esque skills competition that showcases these guys in a fun light that's totally different from what they're doing inside the ropes, but it's also applying many of the same principles that we're used to, right? With shot making, with precision, with competition. It's just different. And so I think of the NFL Combine, which is sort of different tasks, all with sort of a quote unquote shot clock in mind. The Pro Bowl has switched its format in recent years. The NBA 3-point shooting contest. These are all things that take the same concepts that you have with basketball or football or even the home run derby in baseball, and just applying it differently. Viewers like to have a clock. It provides competitive stress. It combines competitive tension. And I think when you look at sort of these late season events that we've seen over the years, whether it's the match or something else, why have they been a little bit snoozy at times? Because there's so much dead air during those competitions. And when there's dead air and you're waiting between shots, then you're relying on players' personalities to fill the void and carry the broadcast. And as we've seen, there are not that many players who are comedic geniuses who are capable of doing that. You need guys with energy and charisma, but that's still secondary to the competition that's on the screen. That's why I think the Golf Channel games can really be the most successful, because it's constant energy, constant competition for 2 or 3 hours.
I would argue that almost every other sport, at least major sport, has some sort of shot clock element to it. Look at what they did with baseball, adding the shot clock to the pitch, or the pitch clock rather. I think that you're right. It adds stress. It adds an element to it that I think keeps fans engaged, but it also keeps it in bite-sized elements. Can't stress this enough, that you need to make sure that the product that you're presenting to the public today needs to be something they can digest in 30 or 45 seconds and then turn back to their phone or walk into the kitchen or whatever it is they want to do, because everyone's going to be multitasking on some level when they're digesting this particular content. I should not be surprised that you choose to take a victory lap on something I actually don't remember you ever saying. I would love Fred, who's on the podcast right now, pulling up some of the bad takes that you have, because you never want to do the walk of shame, but you certainly love taking the victory lap when the time comes. So, all right, I'll give you a credit. I'll give you a pat on the back when it comes to that. I think, and Johnson Wagner did this. They announced this morning on Gary Williams' show, 5 Clubs on Golf Channel. And I thought Johnson Wagner pointed out, of the 4 disciplines, essentially, that you're going to have in this competition, his most interesting is going to be the 14 club. And I entirely agree, only because when people ask me if they're going to Bay Hill, I live in Orlando, and friends of mine that don't know anything about golf, and what should I do? And I always say, find out what time. Back in the day, it used to be Bubba Watson. Now it's Scottie Scheffler. Find a shot maker. Find out what time he's going to go to the range and just watch him hit shots. Not only is it entertaining, but it's also educational on some level, because if you're watching, if you're paying attention close enough, you're probably going to pick something up that they do that you can apply to your own game. This 14 club challenge takes that to the extreme, because I can add one. It's sort of, there's a tactical element to it. If it's going to be 150 yards and you get to choose first, of course, Rory's going to choose the 9-iron and smile broadly as he sits and watch Scottie try to figure out, well, I can muscle a pitching wedge, or I can try to feather an 8-iron, and it's only going to grow from an interest point of view from there. But it's also the shot making. I mean, the idea of Scottie Scheffler trying to hit a driver 150 yards just seems wildly entertaining to me.
See, I think Scottie is going to mop the field in that particular challenge.
Probably.
Because everyone says, boy, how did Scottie Scheffler become the best iron player since peak Tiger Woods? It's because of challenges just like this. He and his longtime swing coach, Randy Smith, have set up on the range at Royal Oaks. They've picked a target, and you need to hit a shot that's going to land near the flag. It can be carving a 7-iron. It can be hoisting a pitching wedge downwind as high as you possibly can. But his distance control, his accuracy, his creativity, his imagination, his shot making, it literally plays right into that challenge. So if you're Rory, like you're going to need to win other challenges during this competition, because I've got to say Scottie Scheffler is absolutely going to mop the floor. Like, he is the most creative player on the PGA Tour, and he's also the best iron player. And though that combination is going to prove lethal in that particular stage.
And the one that when I got the press release this morning, I was sort of reading over it, and I had to read it a couple times. I was trying to understand all 14 clubs. We're going to do this with the putter. Is that right? I remember playing golf with a friend of mine. He's a long drive guy. Played professional baseball. His name was Dan Beaver, and he could hit his putter almost 200 yards. It was a thing of beauty to see. He would just clobber it. And this is what he did. He kind of specialized in it. I can imagine a scenario where there's a player that has a putter that's a little bit longer than a putter than you and I play. Maybe it's counterbalanced. Maybe it's a different kind of mallet.
You're saying Akshay Bhatia is all of a sudden going to be doing a full swing with the broom handle?
What is Matt Kuchar going to do? What is Lucas Glover going to do? Like, it creates a lot of questions for me, but this goes into the tactical element of it, is why I was looking forward to that one the most. The other one that got pointed out is where the final challenge, I believe, is where you sort of have a staging area. One player's hitting a drive, another player's hitting from the fairway. And then there's 2 players up by the green, one to chip or putt first, the other probably putt out. I like that idea, but I want to see them running. I really do. I want to see Rory running from the tee to the green.
That's goofy. I don't want to see speed golf.
Well, Rory's probably a bad example, and Scottie's probably a bad example, because both of them are very good athletes. But I can imagine other examples I'm not going to name that would be a little comical, watching them try to waddle from the tee to the green.
I'm with you. The final rosters have not yet been finalized, according to the press release. The 8-man teams, 3 others in addition to the 2 captains, will be released in the next couple of weeks. I'm anticipating, or at least I'm hopeful, of some sort of like American versus international flair. Team golf at its finest. Again, this is December 17th. That's the week before Christmas. That's the day before my son's 7th birthday. All very exciting. But I do think it works, Rex, in like the overall golf calendar for December. All of a sudden, if you look at like late November and December, you've got the Skins game. You've got the Hero World Challenge hosted by Tiger Woods. You have the Golf Channel games on December 17th. You have the PNC Championship later that week. Still to be determined if Tiger and Charlie Woods will be gunning for glory once again in Orlando. TGL Season 2 kicks off a couple of days after Christmas. As much of a fan as I am of the PGA Tour condensing its course schedule, I also have like a Pavlovian response right? Like if it's Thursday at 3 p.m., like I want to watch golf. And so give me golf in the fall, give me golf in the winter, give me fall PGA Tour events for status, give me DP World Tour events in the early morning with coffee golf, give me these one-off events at night. I think there's room for all of it in the golf ecosystem. You and I are certainly looking forward to the Golf Channel games. I'm sure we'll have some sort of preview content on site at Trump National Jupiter. For more information on the Golf Channel games, you guys know the drill. NBCSports.com/golf, aka golfchannel.com. Rex, you are heading to Napa next week for the PGA Tour's Pro Tour Championship. It's actually a busy week in the world of golf. We have the Walker Cup later this week at Cypress Point. Can't wait to tune in to that. You'll be going to Napa for the first event of the PGA Tour fall schedule. Also, at least 10 members of the U.S. Ryder Cup team are expected to tee it up. Xander Schauffele still TBD. He has until Friday to commit to that one. Also, as mentioned, the DP World Tour's BMW PGA Championship, the flagship event on the European Tour, kicks off next week in Wentworth. What are you most curious about seeing next week at the Pro Tour? I'm sure we'll have a midweek podcast from Napa with some of your observations, but what are you going out there trying to find out?
I think this fall is going to be different than any other fall on the PGA Tour, simply because of what the tour will become next year. Everything's going to be condensed. You're going to have smaller fields. Top 100 is now the magic number to keep your card. And there's going to be a lot of movement. My guess is there's going to be a lot of emotion in the fall. Like the one thing that you and I talk about all the time that makes tournaments fun to cover, that people care for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, you want to win majors, you want to win the Ryder Cup. But when you get into a situation where old Q school, the way it used to be, when you get into a situation, you usually see it. We saw it last year with Joel Damon, certainly at the RSM Classic, where I think there's going to be more of that simply because the consequences, the stakes seem even higher. But no, that's not why I'm going to Napa. I'm going to Napa for the wine. I'm going to Napa because the Ryder Cup, as you pointed out, 10 of the 12 have already committed. The idea that this is essentially going to be, I don't know how you want to call it, maybe a training camp, maybe just getting guys ready, knocking some rust off. It was the one thing that I was told, that coming out of Rome, they always do a checklist after the fact. What went right? What went wrong? One of the things that they felt like went wrong is there was just too much downtime between East Lake and getting to Rome. Players really weren't able to stay sharp. And look, that's a byproduct sometimes of the schedule, and that's a byproduct sometimes of it's really been a long season for a lot of these top players. They've worn themselves out. And the idea that I'd love to take 2 or even 3 weeks off before heading to the Ryder Cup probably sounds really good until you actually get to the Ryder Cup and you realize that my game's not where I want it to be. So I think they came around on the idea of let's show up in Napa. Let's play this event. Let's knock some rust off. Let's get 4 rounds in with a card in our back, scorecard in our back pocket. That way you're as sharp as possible going into what's going to be the biggest event of the fall.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart move by Keegan Bradley and company. Sort of a no-brainer move after what happened in Rome. 5 weeks off was going to be way too much. And look, Silverado is not a perfect facsimile for what you're going to see at Bethpage Black. However, getting some competitive juices, having team dinners, having team outings. I'm sure the PGA Tour will be in cooperation with Keegan Bradley and company, and we might see some very interesting pairings and groupings over the first 2 rounds of the first fall event as well. You see what's happening on the European Tour as well. Rory's playing this week at the Irish Open. Almost every European Ryder Cup team member is playing next week at the BMW PGA, just trying to maintain sharpness. And what Scottie Scheffler said after East Lake, I'm going to take a couple of days off, and then I'm right back into tournament prep mode. That's one of the benefits of having a start like the Pro Tour Championship, where you just don't put the clubs away too long. You don't lose your feels. You don't have to ramp up that intensely. I think it's a no-brainer move for both teams. It's certainly going to be very interesting to see who continues to play well and who is a little bit off their game. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Golf Show Podcast with Rex and Lav. We'll be back next week for a full recap of the Irish Open, full previews of those 2 aforementioned events. We'll also check in on Rex's wine tour through wine country in Napa and anything else that comes up in the world of golf. In the meantime, you guys know the drill. NBCSports.com/golf, aka golfchannel.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for support. We'll talk to you guys next week.